Hello, my friends. Today it's my great pleasure to welcome to this conversation Dr. Chiti Parikh, and she's written this amazing book, Intentional Health, which includes a 28-day health reset plan. The book is published by Hay House, and it is about optimizing your circadian rhythms, strengthening and protecting your microbiome, aligning what you eat with what you can digest, and syncing your diet with your constitution according to Ayurvedic principles. Dr. Parikh is Executive Director of the Integrative Health and Wellbeing Program at New York Presbyterian Hospital and a clinical professor at Weill Cornell Medicine. She's one of a handful of physicians in the country to have been an interdisciplinary physician specializing in both Eastern and Western medicine, and has a passion to spread this knowledge. I had the pleasure of meeting her recently and reading the book. So thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah. So let's start with your own life journey. How did you have some very interesting photographs here and about exotic practices, but you're a regular physician, just like me, with a license to practice medicine in New York, I presume, and many, and you're also a teacher at the medical school. So share with me how you ended up, of course, writing the book, but your own journey into this area, because you trained as a physician right here.
Absolutely. Yeah. I grew up in India, and I moved here when I was a teenager. So I had the fortune of understanding both cultures from very early on. I never planned on going into medicine. Ironically, I always said I would never become a doctor, but that all changed one day. What really shaped my journey into integrative medicine and intentional health was actually a year between college and medical school. I spent a year backpacking alone through Asia. And this was before, Google Maps. This was before iPhone. And I really had the pleasure of spending time from silent meditation retreats to meeting monks in the most remote part of Asia. And that really shaped who I am today. And that has really inspired me to bring what I learned through my travels, through my upbringing, into my clinical practice. So what I've learned through years of medical school training and seeing thousands of patients is this realization that our body is so incredibly intelligent. And everything we need to live a healthy life is right within us. It's not outside in a diet or an exercise routine or anything. It's all etched into us. It's right here. And I had a glimpse of that firsthand in 2020. What happened was I was on the front lines during COVID in New York, and I got COVID while I was on the front lines in April. And I did not really have time to recover. I had to go right back, because the need was so dire. But I ended up developing really bad long COVID. So this was before we even knew what long COVID was. I was just one of the handful of people who had actually gotten COVID. And I started losing weight very fast. My hair was falling out. I was getting short of breath, going up even a couple of flights of stairs. So I scoured every medical journal I could find and trying to figure out what was going on and try to understand and how to heal from that. And I know this is really bizarre, but I was on Amazon one day ordering probably paper towels and a book about a 185-year-old yogi that was completely out of print somehow came up in my feed. Out of curiosity, I clicked on it. And I grew up in a culture where I read about yogis and I met yogis, so it was nothing new to me. But it was interesting. It came up on my feed out of nowhere, and I clicked on it. I ordered the out of publication book, read it. And that's when I learned about the science of Kaya Kalp. So how does a yogi become 185 years? And how does a yogi live to be 185? So there's ancient knowledge, a technique called Kaya Kalp, which is transformation of your body. And yogis use this technique to rejuvenate their body from time to time so that they can live a long life, so they can continue pursuing their spiritual quest. And within that, there's knowledge about something called panchakarma, which is part of Ayurveda, which is very well known. It is a detoxification process that anyone can do. So Kaya Kalpa is for the yogis, and panchakarma is for us mere mortals. So I decided I'm going to do panchakarma. I've heard about it. I've recommended to many people, but had never really, gone through the whole process. So for 1 month, I did an intense panchakarma practice. And what I saw was transformative. I always believed in that inner intelligence, but within a few days, when my hair stopped falling, my weight start coming up, I just felt at ease. I really finally felt like myself. And months later, I know this, I'm not being vain, but this is something I could see physically happening. My nails started growing. This is so bizarre. My nails started growing, at a point where I had to cut them every few days. So this is just something I could see outside, but I know that was just an evidence of what transformation actually had taken place within me. So I wanted to bring this knowledge. It's not about curing long COVID or anything like that. I knew it was about time that I brought this knowledge that's been around, this science, 5,000-year-old science, to the people. I have a full practice. I'm not looking for more patients. I have 1,000 patients on the wait list. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose and my true passion lies in bringing 5,000-year science to everyone so that everyone can use it to live a healthy and vital life. That's what the incentive and inspiration behind this book has been.
Great. So let me ask you a few questions because I'm sure many are curious about this. Where did you go to medical school?
So I went to medical school at Robert Wood Johnson, which is now Rutgers Medical School in New Jersey, and I did my residency training at Cornell in internal medicine.
And all this while there was no interest in Ayurveda, etc. Correct?
So I always practiced Ayurveda in my personal life. But what happened was after residency, I started practicing in the hospital. And I realized that what I was doing was practicing sick care, not health care. The reason why I became a doctor was I wanted to keep people healthy. So I wanted to focus on that 95% of someone's life that happens outside of the hospital. And I wanted to keep them out of the hospital as much as possible. So I was very fortunate to be able to be in an institution as York Presbyterian and Cornell that they were open to the idea of actually bringing this type of integrative model of care to the patients. So I started the Integrative Medicine Center at Cornell New Presbyterian almost 9 years ago now. And every year we see over 12,000 patients, and this center has doctors alongside acupuncturists, nutritionists, meditation instructors, yoga, Tai Chi instructors, all working together to really practice healthcare, not just sick care.
Just as an aside, I opened an Ayurvedic center in Massachusetts in the 1970s with Panchakarma and all the elements. And then I did get interested in Kaya Kalpa, and of course I read all about it. I had very difficult time finding an authentic yogi who had practiced Kaya Kalpa in the way that it has been described, and I couldn't find any documentation of anyone living beyond say 122, at least on online searches and other places. Were you able to actually find someone at a very advanced age? I mean, recently, because of the interest in health span and epigenetics and all that, which we can talk about in a moment, there's a lot of interest in longevity and health span. And so I've been looking at people both personally, online, interviewing people. Recently interviewed a 103-year-old physician actually who still practices and is somewhere in the Midwest. and she knows a lot about parasympathetic stimulation, and also a lot about vagal innervation, and a lot about panchakarma. But I personally have not yet encountered anyone, either online or personally, that's gone beyond 120. Have you? I'm just out of curiosity.
Not that I cannot verify this, but when I was in Myanmar traveling,
Mhm.
I did go to a very remote monastery, and there were monks meditating there that people said were above 150, closer to 180. Again, there's no evidence, there's no proof, but they were talking about events that had happened a long, long time ago, as if they were living at that time. So when you go out there in these remote parts and when you meet people like that, it definitely piques your curiosity, but also makes you believe that there has to be something about this, because these are some of the harshest areas to live in, right? And people have survived in these areas, have meditated deep into Himalayas in extreme conditions for so long. So I think what we're seeing in research studies is glimpses of how people are able to activate their stem cells. That's basically what Kaya Kalpa is. It's a science of activating your stem cells so you can rejuvenate your body inside out. And we're trying to mimic that in the lab. So I strongly believe that there are yogic traditions and this knowledge is out there. It's just not in our reach just yet. But I hope we learn more about it and we approach it from both Western and Eastern medicine so we can understand the science behind how stem cell activation really works through these yogic techniques. So it's a fascinating world, though.
Yeah, so I also, in the 70s, there was a physician called Dr. Alexander Leaf. He was the head of Mass General Department of Medicine, and he actually traveled to some of these places, including Ladakh, Afghanistan, etc. And he, in his book and in his writings, said a lot of people claimed advanced ages, but there was no way he could document them. And in fact, in these traditions, it was glamorous to look old or be old, because that was the cultural mindset. So when he asked people their ages, they usually exaggerated them, and there was no birth certificate anyway to document that. So, leaving that aside, there's also something that scientists talk about called the Hayflick limit, as you know, that cells can only divide so many times according to the Hayflick limit. It's unlikely that anyone can live beyond 120, but now we do have documented cases of over 120. 122, I believe, is the most longest documented case so far. But this idea of stem cell simulation seems very intriguing and does make sense. We have friends here in New York that I should introduce you to. Somebody he used to be at Mount Sinai, but now he's with the new what Mount Sinai was absorbed into something else, right? And the
Yeah, there are a few hospitals. Beth Israel became Mount Sinai. Yeah. And there's
whatever.
also
But
Northwell. Yeah.
so Neil Thies is a friend of mine. He's a MD, he's a PhD, and in fact, he was one of the first people to find stem cells in circulation, also in the liver. And he also described a system in the body, which basically wasn't described before, to the fascial system, etc. He's a very innovative researcher, so we should talk to him about stem cell activation. As you know, there are many other people who are doing hyperbaric oxygen and then stem cells with embryonic cells. In fact, in New Jersey, you have somebody doing that. But I've always been intrigued by the idea of signaling molecules, which Ayurveda also has, by the way, all these adaptogens like
Hmm.
ashwagandha, shatavari,
Ashwagandha. Yeah.
that
Hmm.
are all signaling molecules, and they're known as adaptogens. And it's quite possible that they also stimulate stem cells. So this is an area that's definitely worth looking into. What is very obvious, though, and that is something that I don't think most of the people who are listening to this conversation would be aware of, is that less than 5% of disease is due to what we call fully penetrant genes, which guarantee the disease, like BRCA gene, whatever, not only for cancer, but for everything.
Right.
And most of it, 95%, can be modulated through epigenetics. And according to epigenetics, any experience we have, emotional experience, relationships, social engagements, but also breathing techniques and detoxification and diets like that, yoga, particularly pranayama, and the different postures. If you go over the 35 different routines with the yoga asanas, you end up stimulating every branch of the vagus nerve, and maybe that is the basis of homeostasis, is vagal stimulation. And we live in these times where everybody's on sympathetic overdrive and inflammation. So it all makes sense. What you're saying all makes sense. And of course, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that we can live longer, healthier, and except those 5% of cases which are fully penetrant genes. Even for that now, CRISPR is around the horizon, and you'll soon have gene editing. So given all that, it looks like chronic disease could be optional. It could be a choice that we can avoid almost totally, if not 95%, but with all the new technologies, maybe even 100%. So your book is a definite contribution in that area. And I just want to share with our audience the 7 ancient secrets you talk about, because the first one in chapter 2, you talk about circadian rhythm. Now, of course, in Ayurveda, they also talk about seasonal rhythms and gravitational rhythms and lunar rhythms. But I guess the circadian rhythm is, once you reset that, all the other rhythms are in a way entangled. So share with our audience what we can expect to find in this section, circadian rhythms.
Absolutely. I think a lot of this 7 ancient secrets came about from not just reading all about, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, but also my personal experience with my thousands of patients. A lot of times I see people who are already following a relatively healthy diet, they're exercising, they're seemingly doing all the right things, yet they do not feel like they are like themselves, like they're balanced, right? So what's actually missing? What I realize is that fundamentals of health are fundamental. If they're in place, all the diet, exercise, all the efforts we're putting in, you'll get maximum results. The fundamentals are not there, then we're sort of swimming upstream. So the 7 ancient secrets, step by step, guide you in that direction, how to strengthen the fundamentals and actually understand how your body, how it's unique, how it's different than everyone else's, and learning more about it. So the first step is circadian rhythm, because we know that our internal computer, our software, is very much synchronized to everything else around us in nature and in the universe. So circadian rhythm optimization is step number 1. What time we wake up, what time we eat, what time we go to the bathroom, what time we sleep, all of that is extremely important in resetting our circadian rhythm on a daily basis. Majority of the diseases now we know come about because of that disruption in circadian rhythm. Hence, there's a whole new field of chronobiology, right? That came about a few years ago. Someone received a Nobel Prize in medicine for that. Because now we're recognizing that all the clocks, even which genes are turned on and off, are directly related to our circadian rhythm. So if that is disrupted, that often becomes that first domino that falls and leads to chronic diseases. So I always joke around with my patients and I tell them, as your doctor, I do not care about your diet. I do not care about whether you go to the gym, and I definitely don't care about your weight. So they're always shocked that as a doctor, how do you not care about my weight, my diet, whether I go to the gym or not? I tell them, I don't care about your diet, what you eat. I care more about when you eat. There's so much science behind the meal timing. And I also care about when you don't eat, AKA intermittent fasting. So I talk about a lot of studies that are validating this. So we're physiologically not the same person at 9 a.m. versus 9 p.m. Our genes, our hormones, everything is changing hour by hour. So I superimposed our circadian clock from Western medicine with that of the Eastern medicine clock that's in Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. And they are right on top of each other and they make complete sense. So every hour, our body is designed to do a different activity. So the more we synchronize our daily routine to that circadian rhythm, the more we can get out of it. So that synchronization is step number one along that intentional health journey. So that's the reason why it's the first chapter. So that's why people are always fascinated when I say I don't care about these things, because the timing of things is far more important than just the activity itself.
Daily and seasonal routines and the diet that changes with the daily seasonal routines, what time you exercise, what time you go to sleep, etc. Very important. Okay, let's move to the second secret here, the good bacteria.
Yes, that's the whole other universe that we're talking about. Just like there's a universe outside, there's a whole universe within us. And science is validating the importance of gut microbiome. There's not a day that goes by that I don't hear about the gut microbiome or a new study coming out, right? And in Ayurveda, we know in Chinese medicine also, they say every disease starts in the gut. And the root cause of so many diseases is that imbalance in the gut, because our digestion is off balance. And that leads to an abnormal or dysbiosis or improper gut microbiome, where we shift the balance between good and bad bacteria. And we have the opportunity to fix our gut microbiome every single day, right? From our diet, from our exposures. So that's why I want to introduce the audience to the concept of gut microbiome, not just from the Western medicine approach, but also from Eastern medicine, that focuses more on how to nurture your gut microbiome by focusing on seasonal foods. But also, as we move into the next chapters, I talk about the digestive fire, right? So if you want to nurture a good, healthy gut microbiome, we have to first work on our digestion and understand how strong our digestion is and match our diet and lifestyle according to that digestion. So I know I'm jumping ahead, but as we go into digestive fire, in Western medicines, we always talk about, there's this diet, there's keto, there's vegan, there's paleo. In Eastern medicine, there are no diets. The perfect diet for me right now is whatever matches my digestion. And that is changing, right? Today, if I'm feeling well, my digestion is strong, so I can get away with eating a lot of different things. But when my digestion is weak, I need to adjust my diet to simplify it. So when we match our digestion with what we're eating, that's health. Because in Ayurveda, there's a saying that food that is digested properly becomes nutrition, and food that is not digested properly becomes toxin and root cause of diseases. Food is the same. It's our digestion that makes the complete difference.
And then in the book, you outlined ways to maximize the digestive fire.
Digestion.
But
Exactly.
let's go back to the microbiome for a moment, because, and this keeps changing as I follow the literature, but we do have 25,000 human genes, and I guess we have millions of bacterial genes, right? They're way more than our human genes are. In 2012, we did a study at the Chopra Foundation, along with Mount Sinai and other institutions, including Harvard and Duke, where in 1 week of meditation and yoga, we saw all the human genes responsible for homeostasis go up in their activity, some 17-fold over baseline. All the genes that were responsible for inflammation, chronic disease, Alzheimer's, etc., went down significantly. The level of the enzyme telomerase went up by 40%, even though we had Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel for discovering telomerase, as one of our co-authors. It took us 5 years to get the study published in a major journal, finally did in Nature, Translational Psychiatry, and then it was replicated. So it's obvious that, meditation, yoga, and everything you're talking about can upgrade the activity of the human genes we have. But if you're looking at the microbiome, not only do we change their activity, we change their population, right? So in other words, we're changing the software of the body. If the body is the
Right.
printout of genes,
Mhm.
then theoretically you can change 95% of your genetic information, and the remaining 5% you can upgrade. What do you say about that? Do you agree?
100%. And that's why I emphasize the importance of gut microbiome, because that is our opportunity to reset our internal software every single day. So the choices we're making, I always tell people what you're eating, the diet you are putting into your body, you're not just feeding yourself. Think about the fact that you're feeding trillions of gut bacteria. So be a good host. I was raised in an Indian family, so I was trained to be a good host. If anyone comes to your house, you feed them the best food possible. So I want people to be a very good host to their gut microbiome. So when you're eating, keep in mind that you're nourishing not just your body, but you're also keeping the gut microbiome healthy and thriving for years to come. And that step happens on a daily basis. It's not just popping a probiotic. It's so much more than that, right? It's tending to the gut microbiome on a daily basis.
Are you a fan of things like kombucha and all these? In India, of course, we use pickles and also use yogurt and all kinds of fibrous introductions to diet to change the microbiome on a daily basis. So, what
Absolutely. I think we need Yeah, so some of the diet recommendations I make in the book are really focused on not just getting the probiotic-rich foods, which I obviously encourage, but again, remember we have to feed the good bacteria. So prebiotics are just as important. So taking probiotics, so you're inviting the guests, but if you don't feed them, they're not going to stick around. So the prebiotics come from diversity in fiber. So fiber is that missing ingredient. So I always tell people, like, we think about carbs in our diet, protein and fat in our diet. The fourth macronutrient I want people to think about is fiber. And diversity in fiber, the diversity in the food that we feed the good bacteria equals diversity in the type of bacteria that we have. So all the studies are saying it's not just getting a few good bacteria, it's the diversity. Think about the gut microbiome as your defense system. So we have the Army, we have Navy, we have Air Force, right? So the more diversity and different types of bacteria that we have in the gut is really key to protecting our immune system and training our immune system. One of the reasons why we see a lot of autoimmune conditions and allergies in more developed countries is because our exposure to different types of bacteria is very limited. So we don't have a diverse defense system. It's not trained enough to know the difference between food and an actual pathogen. That's why our immune system is hyper all the time and overreacting to things. So one of the ways to address it is really bringing in that diversity in our food by incorporating different sources of fiber, the prebiotics, just as important as the probiotics
you say that
themselves.
that's a maximum diversity of plant-based fibrous foods. In India, when I was growing up, we had a favorite food called lotus root. And I had a lot of difficulty finding it. Finally, I found a Chinese restaurant here close to my house, and they serve lotus root, which is very tasty and full of fiber.
Delicious.
And
Mhm.
so, is that your tactic? Maximum diversity of plant-based fibrous foods.
Exactly. Diversity is so key because a lot of times people get in the habit, they're eating kimchi and they just eat kimchi every single day or kombucha, right? So I really encourage people, even people already eating a healthy diet, to think about diversity. So I always share them a list of seasonal foods. So if you're eating seasonally, you will naturally add that diversity into your diet on an annual basis. And also research studies show that eating seasonally also ensures that the food that are in season tend to have the highest amount of antioxidants, right? So eating them fresh while in season can actually provide you with an extra boost of antioxidant on top of giving you all that prebiotic fiber that's good for the gut microbiome.
In your practice, do you test people's microbiome? Because these days there's so many commercial.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big part of my practice is addressing gut health. So, and this is a perfect example of how I love to combine the best of Eastern and Western medicine. Someone who comes to my practice with autoimmune conditions or neurological conditions or just gut imbalance, like things like irritable bowel syndrome, I'll often do a gut microbiome test. And based on the results, will customize their diet, their lifestyle, and they might also walk away with recommendations for different herbs. One of the big herbs I often use is something like triphala or harataki. And there are studies that show that triphala actually helps, shift your gut microbiome because it increases production of often the postbiotics. Something called butyrate, I really check in people's gut microbiome. There's a lot of research on postbiotics, things like butyrate. There have been fascinating studies on that recently. So I really encourage people to actually look at your gut microbiome and adjust your diet, lifestyle, supplement herbs accordingly, rather than just taking everything that's out there that you can find at a health food store.
And these tests are easily available these
They're
days.
easily available. Yeah, and they're done at home. They're either 1 to 3 day stool tests. You do it at home and you ship it out to the lab. And these labs have been around for quite some time. They have excellent databases. They publish several research studies, so we know what normal looks like, what abnormal looks like. And I think the next few years, we're only learning more about this. And we're not so far from the day where you go to the doctor's office and instead of just your blood test, we'll also be taking your stool test. And hopefully, eventually, we'll be doing a swab, oral swab. And you can just put that on the slide and get an instant report of your oral microbiome. So in the book, I talk a lot about the oral microbiome. And in Ayurveda, there's a whole practice of, whether it's oil pulling or really, there's a lot of emphasis on oral health, because that's something I find a direct correlation between people with poor oral health often have more gut dysbiosis or imbalance in the gut bacteria. So I talk about a lot of Ayurvedic practices to emphasize on oral health on a regular basis so that we're not missing a big piece of gut microbiome, which is right here in our mouth.
You talk about the root cause. So, what is the root cause?
So in the root cause chapter, I talk about Chinese medicine concept of our different constitutions. In Chinese medicine, the root cause of diseases can be either internal or external. External tend to be related to the environment, right? So before we had air conditions and heaters, people had to be out in the elements and they were very susceptible to getting sick. Nowadays, we have air conditions and heaters, but we also have pollution. We have global warming. So now the external causes of diseases, the root causes of diseases tend to be more environmental. And I honestly think we are missing a big piece of that in academic medicine. There's just not enough researchers catching up to the fact that the environmental toxins are really causing a big disease burden on our population. So I talk a little bit about how external factors from global warming to pollution in the air, the water, the soil is actually affecting us. And then the internal causes of imbalance or root cause of disease tends to come from one of the 4 things, either diet, sleep, stress, or lack of exercise. So I go into detail about that. And I also educate the readers about understanding their own unique constitution. So I introduce the concept of how a constitution can be hot, cold, damp, or dry. I know this is a very new way of thinking about your body, whether you tend to run hot, dry, damp. So I break it down and make it very easy for you to understand. There's also a little quiz that you can take to understand your unique constitution from the perspective of Chinese medicine. So I teach the readers how to understand your constitution and how to adjust your diet and lifestyle accordingly. So I am a cold and a dry constitution. In Ayurveda, it's Vata. In Chinese medicine, it's cold and dry. So in a season like today, in New York City, it's a cold winter day. So this is when the cold and dryness are really palpable outside. So I don't like this weather. I'm much happier in Florida or Hawaii, right? So I can't necessarily go to Hawaii right now, but I can mimic that by eating, warm soups, broths and things like that that tend to warm me from inside out. So I talk a lot about how to adjust your diet and your lifestyle, how to cook your food, how to eat your food in a way that complements your unique constitution. So that's how we address the root causes of diseases, addressing those internal and external factors that bring about disease in general.
Very similar, as you just said, to the Ayurvedic concept. So, Vata is a propensity to, say, degenerative disorders, Pitta to inflammatory disorders, kapha to retentive disorders, metabolic syndrome, etc. And I was thinking, actually, I was talking to Dabur, which is one of the biggest Ayurvedic product companies in India, about maybe even classifying these, both the Chinese and the Indian systems, with epigenetic measurements. I'm sure the genes activity would be different in these body types.
100%. And you know what's fascinating in this chapter, when I talk about Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, about the hot and cold, it seems like an esoteric abstract concept, but there's actually a fascinating study that came out 3 years ago where researchers looked at the macro and micronutrient constitution of the food itself. So let's say if I pick a food, let's say I'm taking bananas, then I look at how much magnesium, potassium, protein, carbs, and they came up with different breakdown of the products, and they came up with a mathematical formula that you can plug in for any food what the vitamin or micronutrient constitution is, plug it in, and it will tell you whether the food is hot, cold, damp, or dry. And there was a perfect correlation between the two. So it's fascinating.
Could use AI to actually refine.
Just imagine now if you can use an AI model and you put in these foods and it will tell you if it's hot, cold, damp, or dry. And if you put in your constitution, then AI can come up with a diet for you for the season, right? And that's exactly where we're headed now. So
I'm speaking with Dr. Chiti Parikh. The book is called Intentional Health: Detoxify, Nourish, and Rejuvenate Your Body into Balance. The remaining chapters include the anti-aging detox. We don't want to give away everything in the book. The mind-body connection, the breath of life, and then there's part 3, which talks about the 28-day reset and the 20-minute daily ritual. The book has lots of very useful endnotes and references, so I found it very useful. Chiti, congratulations on this book.
thank you.
And I hope people will pick it up and benefit from it. You're a busy doctor, so no point asking them to go make an appointment with you. But I think they can start off by reading the book and get more information. So I'm not going to read the rest of the chapter titles. I want people to pick up the book and benefit from it directly. Anything more you'd like to say?
One last thing I'll say is that in the main message of the book is that health is about balance. It's not about perfection. So think about health as striking that balance between the yin and the yang, and it's not about pursuing a perfect picture of health. So use this book, use the knowledge that's been around for 5,000 years to bring your body back to balance anytime you need it. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me.